and warmth here tonight.
Terrific. I mean, this is terrific. I mean, the problem is when you have a new film coming out, you're so worried about everything. You're so worried about everyone's reaction. If someone is leaving the theater and then, oh, they come back, they were just going to the bathroom. And everything is so tense. So when you get to do it, this is like the pleasure part of filmmaking, that people know what they think of the film. They come and enjoy it.
Well, on that note, let's hear your questions and your thoughts. And we don't have a mic runner, so I'll take your questions if you could just speak loudly, and I'll hear them. So with the hat, please, and just speak loudly, and I'll repeat your question.
Hi, Mr. Stillman. I have a question for you, because it comes up in some of your movies. Could you talk about how your characters, they're almost off-screen characters, but could you talk about how your characters feel about New Jersey and Connecticut?
The question is, can you talk about how your characters feel about New Jersey and Connecticut?
I'm not sure if we've talked that much about New Jersey. We shot the interior of the disco nightclub in Las Days of Disco in New Jersey, in Jersey City, the Jersey City Lows, which is a great location. I think we do talk about Connecticut. One thing about geography I noticed in the films is that the kind of relief, the escape, is going across the Queensboro Bridge to something in Long Island. So here it's going out to the Hamptons. And in Last Days of Disco, they're supposedly going to Barcelona or something like that. They're going to Spain. And I do think that I sort of grew hostile towards New York, deeply hostile. And I just loved getting out of New York every which way. And so this generally, the houses I could go to would be up in Hudson Valley, where I grew up. And so normally it's going north, but also that crossing the Queensboro Bridge is usually a happy thing. Getting out of town.
Got a question right here, yeah.
This is, you can think of this as a follow-up of the last question, which was about the tone and the perspective on the characters. And there's something in the tone and the perspective which I would describe as tender irony, which very much reminds me of Eric Romer's tone in his movies. I wonder if he's in any way an influence, or does it matter to you, or if yes, could you speak to that?
The question was about if Eric Romer is an influence, because there's like a tender kind of irony in the tone of your films.
I never had much affinity for Eric Romer's films. I admired tremendously what he did. He complained that when his films were distributed here, the people writing the subtitles made them more funny than they were intended to be. That was not my experience with subtitles. My experience with subtitles was that they translate everything perfectly until the punchline, and then they think that something was wrong and change the punchline. But Eric Romer was really helpful to us for many reasons. He sort of gave the parameters for considering the films when it first came out. So people need to sort of describe a film without ruining it or without making people decide not to go see it. So when Metropolitan first came out, a lot of people said it's somewhere between Eric Romer and Woody Allen. And I think that's true in the sense it's the naturalism of Romer. It's those sort of scenes with young people. But there's intention for comedy that comes from Woody Allen, although he does a different kind of comedy. And so even though I don't think they resemble either one exactly, that was really helpful for us.
Right in the middle of the back. Yep, you.
So you mentioned that Tom was somewhat autobiographical and that you had far-left connections near you. Do you still gravitate towards socialism, or is that just a feature of the character?
I think we all heard it. Do you still gravitate towards socialism, or is that a feature of the character?
Well, check out my Twitter account.
And you're a Blue Sky now, too?
I signed up for that, but I don't think I can manage more than one account.
Okay. I saw one over here, yeah.
But thanks for the question.
I wanted to ask about your approach to blocking the characters on camera. Is it more of a spontaneous on-set thing, or is it you plan immediately? Because the camera blocking in this is incredible.
So the question is about the incredible camera blocking and blocking the characters, and also the framing. There's some really wonderful framing choices. If I can add on to your question.
Well, again, we were limited in how much we could move the camera and things like that. So all the sort of content that normally maybe you get in with a moving camera, we need to get into a fairly still camera. And there were some real fiascos at the beginning of the shoot. There's a scene we shot that was so embarrassing in dailies. There are a lot of things embarrassing in dailies the first couple of days, like the empty seat in a sofa that you look at for a minute and a half before the actor sits down into it. And you realize you actually don't have to film this empty sofa for a minute and a half. You can just start the camera when he sits down. But the other thing that really looked terrible was there's a scene where they've turned against Tom because he's abandoned Audrey and gone off with Serena to smooch with her in her Park Avenue apartment. And everyone's against him, and he comes in, and we were using sort of the wrong perspective, the wrong lens, the wrong blocking, and you had these big backs, like Audrey Rouget's big naked back in the foreground, and then this tiny weeny Tom Townsend character coming in the door. So after that, we decided to think a lot about blocking and lenses. And so I think you see, I mean, in Wisconsin, the professor I went to a class when we showed the film in Madison, and he had all these stills, and they're really interesting because I could see how we were having the characters sort of slumped down in the sofa in the foreground, doing all these tricks so the foreground would not be back, blocking that. But I really cared tremendously about framing and composition, and John Thomas, the cinematographer, did too. I really love 1930s cinema, and I really absolutely adore what they do, and was trying to have our film look in a classical way like theirs did.
I just want to add, there's this one moment in the film, I'm sure it's intentional, but it's when Tom is at the first party and he's having an intimate conversation. It's not with Audrey, I can't remember who it is, and there's a cut and you realize everyone's in the room. And I think about it all the time. I think it's like one of the funniest cuts I've ever seen. And then they're like, "Oh, you're a Fourierist." It's just, I think about it.
Oh, I see.
It's just like a great cut because everyone's there listening to him. It's just like such a great moment. Yeah, go ahead, right there.
Before attending this event, I was reading on IMDb that you reside in France, and what came to my mind is back in 2016, I attended the Cannes Film Festival, and my question is, with residing in France, has that do you find a creative process with living in France?
So you spent some time. You live in France. You reside in France. So living in Europe, living in France, how does that kind of change your creative process or your creative perspective?
Disastrous. So going to France wasn't my idea. I mean, I love France. I admire France, but my lease in New York came up the weekend that Last Days of Disco came out. So we had to decide where to live, and I just couldn't face the rents and tuitions in New York City. So we had to go somewhere else. And I had like 9 cities in the United States I wanted to live in or thought would be good to live in. And my Spanish wife, had one city she wanted to go to, Paris. So we went to Paris, and it was a really good choice for schools and for apartment at that moment because real estate had collapsed, and they have great schools anyway. And so it was a good choice, but a playwright told me at that time, it's terrible for your career to move to a different country. You're too young, or you're the wrong part of your career to move abroad. And he's really right. It's fatal for a career to deracinate yourself and and it's a wonderful country, and it's changed my perspective a lot on the film Barcelona, because I think people sort of think I was living in Spain or something like that, but my Spanish wife didn't want to live in Spain. She only wanted to live in Manhattan. And so I wanted to live in Spain to sell Spanish films out of Spain, would have been much more convenient. But we did go over to write and prepare the film Barcelona. But when I made the film Barcelona, I was making it very much as an American reacting to Europeans. It has a very much American perspective. The jokes are American jokes, and the Europeans are sort of off over here. Fortunately, when we translated it into Spanish, we were able to change the jokes to make them more even, so they go both ways. But moving to France and really admiring it and respecting it and loving it, and sort of seeing the European perspective, I think I would made a much more balanced Barcelona. And I think the pilot we did for Amazon Cosmopolitans, I think it was totally balanced in its perspective about the countries. And so I wouldn't do that American thing. It really annoys me, people's cliches about France. But I think you should, I think you should generally live in your own country. And I don't know if I've really gained anything. I mean, I terribly, respect their culture and language and all that, but I think it's good to be in your home ground.